Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm drkerryann Williams, and on today's show, I'm going to be speaking with Deborah Jackson. Together, we're going to be talking a little bit about boundaries, how to say no, how to tell people what you really feel instead of what they want to hear. So if you're interested in hearing more about setting boundaries, then keep listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm drkerryann Williams. And this is a show that's all about everything related to mental wellness in the Black community. So if you have any questions or comments throughout the show, just give us a call at 617-238-7111. That's 617-238-7111. We're also streaming live on Facebook on the page heat981fm.com. So if you go to the Facebook page heat981fm.com, you will catch the live stream. And today I have in the studio with me Miss Deborah Jackson.
Hello.
So welcome to the studio, welcome to the show. And today, guys, we're going to be talking about boundaries, how to say no when that's what you really mean, right? So I guess I'll introduce Deborah a little bit. She is a LICSW, a licensed clinical independent social worker, and she also works for JRI, which is where I work. And I'm going to have you talk a little bit about what you do there and why you feel passionate about mental health.
Great. So I've been at JRI for, I just made 16 years. I started as a clinician at an outpatient program that was for adolescents that were aging out of the system, and then adults with intellectual disabilities and serious behavioral regulation problems. And I stayed there for 13 years. I started as a clinician, was the assistant clinical director, and then became program director. And then I was like, I really want to work at a higher level, right? I want to be able to affect more people than I can from this one program. And I still loved JRI as an organization. I really believed in the mission. And through opportunities, I got the ability to go into the corporate training sphere, which I've done for about 3 years. I just made 3 years in training, and that has been amazing. I get to work both internally, right, doing our trainings for the 3,000 staff that work for JRI in 3 states, but also externally. So I do a lot of trainings with various nonprofits, with DCF, and with a lot of organizations that are really committed to training their staff, but don't necessarily have the resources to have that internal training department. And so it's been a really great experience to be able to work with people on that level. And then in addition to what I do at JRI, I sometimes teach. So I've taught before at Simmons University. I teach sometimes at the University of Rhode Island. Because I'm like, how can we just get as many people in here? And really, I think also one of the things that I've gotten a lot of feedback from, and I think is so powerful, is to see Black women in positions of authority, because people don't always see that. And so to see that as, that's my therapist, that's my teacher, that's my trainer, can really give that sense of like affirmation and being seen. And so that's just absolutely right. We have to. And so, that's the work that I do, and I love it. And recently I started my own coaching and consultation business.
Oh yeah, tell us about that, because I didn't know about that last time. Is that since the last time I spoke to you?
Yes, that is since the last time you spoke to me. So it's called Deliberately Daring Coaching and Consultation. So before, I had the Deliberately Daring like Instagram post, and I was like, we're just gonna make this a little side business. COVID is happening. We don't know what's going on. Let's go ahead. And it's been a really great, I'm currently in the process of getting my hours to be ICF credentialed, and really just working. I want to work with BIPOC women to really find what is their authentic self, right? Yeah. I feel like so much of the time we have all of these expectations and all of this sort of quote unquote training that we've gone through for who other people expect us to be. And then we reach this point where like, wait, is that really me? I don't really know. This doesn't really fit. And so there can be a lot of confusion. And it's like, how do we really have that space to figure out who we authentically are, and to then be able to work effectively in that authentic space? Because as we know, some places don't want us to show up as who we truly genuinely are. Yeah. And so that doesn't mean you stop being who yourself is. You want to think about how you do it effectively.
Right. So how to kind of like navigate what people want you to be versus who you are, kind of like how to kind of manage that.
Absolutely.
Wow. And so so you've been doing this basically sometime within the pandemic year.
Yes.
It's funny how the pandemic has been like that. For some people, it's been like this complete disaster. And for others, it's actually been a time where they've been able to develop new projects. And for some people, it's just kind of both, a little bit of both, right?
Exactly.
So there's some bad things and some good things. And I'd say kind of the same thing for myself. I started the radio show in March, right before all the lockdowns. And so for most of the year, my show has been pretty much virtual. It's been remote. But the interesting thing is that throughout that year, I've been able to make all these connections online, and I've been able to have guests on the show that are from out of state, people that I've never met in person, that were just fantastic people to connect with. And so it's great to hear that you have also kind of found a time of like starting a new project and getting something going during the time of the pandemic.
Right. I think it was really, for a lot of us, there was some of that sense of security that was gone. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, what am I going to do when I don't know if these systems I've been trusting in and relying on are still going to be there? Mm-hmm. And for a lot of us, I think there was a lot of personal growth and development that was going on. It's like, okay, well, I have this time now. What I'm going to do with it? Also, I'm now balancing all of these things that maybe I didn't have to in quite the same way. But then it's also like, okay, now I've spent this time, I've done this work, I'm really working on my healing, my growth, my development. How do I then use that in the space that I want to occupy, right? And so I think it's really funny to me because I always said, like, I don't have an entrepreneurial spirit. I like to know where my money's coming from. Yeah. And it was really like, no, let's step out on faith and see what happens here. And I think really just getting to this place of, it doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah. It just has to be the first step, which I think, especially for Black women, is a really hard thing because we're like, if it's not going to be perfect, I don't want to do it. Exactly. As opposed to like, no, let me try, let me explore, let me see, and who knows where it's going to go. And so I'm just going to be really responsive and reflective to the process that's happening.
Yeah, I think fear of failure is a whole thing, right? Fear of failure, I kind of, similar to you, just kind of stepping out and just saying, let's just see what happens. I always ask myself the question, like, what's the worst thing that could happen? The worst thing that could happen is the project I'm working on doesn't work. Okay, yes. That's it? That's the worst thing that can happen? Okay, I can handle that, right? A little bit of CBT. A little
Absolutely.
bit of CBT, right? A little cognitive behavioral therapy, just kind of saying, okay, what's the worst case scenario here? Can I handle the worst case scenario? Yes, no, okay, let's move forward. So,
and I love that you frame it from the CBT perspective, right? Because when I talk and I'm doing that work, I'm always like, is it true? And is it helpful? Because we need to really check in with ourselves. Is the thought that I'm having, one, true? Because a lot of times it's not, right? When we think of our worst case scenario, it's like, and then disaster, and then the world ends. And it's like, okay, wait, is that really a true fear? Where is that coming from? But then also that second step of, is it helpful? Because some stuff is true, but it's not helpful. Yeah. And so it's like, am I putting all of my energy into this thing that actually isn't really helpful for myself? Or staying stuck in this place where all I'm thinking about is the worst case scenario? Because I think we want to take the time, right, to think about, like, well, what is the worst case scenario? Do that check in with yourself, and you're like, oh, it's not actually that bad. I got this.
Yeah.
But we also want to give our space room to imagine, what if it does work out? What if it's better than I ever dreamed it could be, right? Like, what if it turns out so much better than I'm even expecting? Because I think that's a thing that we also struggle with, is that we don't allow ourselves to dream, right, of the possibilities. And that, going back to that idea of the entrepreneurial spirit, is that idea of like, I like to know where my money coming from. I like to know how it's going to work out. I like to see the path ahead of me, as opposed to like, what happens if you could have even better than what you're thinking?
Right.
Imagine that for a change. And I think that's something that, particularly in the Black community, we're not so great at, because we see that reality doesn't always favor us in those situations.
Exactly.
And
the thinking is that, how often does it kind of, it feels at least like it doesn't happen often. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that, because of that, there is that sense of like, well, let me play small and safe. And you want to think about, what are you limiting yourself from, and what maybe gifts are you not operating in? What space are you not being heard in because you're playing it small and safe, as opposed to really just walking out in this thing that you feel called, led, to do, or you have an interest in?
Yeah. What are you not achieving because you're afraid?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I like what you said about kind of the small and safe game. It's kind of this sense of, well, if I don't take a big risk, then I won't have a big failure. But also what you said about not preparing for success either. Because a lot of times you'll just hear this familiar phrase when somebody finally kind of they do something and it turns out to be super successful. They're like, I wasn't ready for this. And they're like, well, why is it that we gear up for failure, but either way we're kind of not prepared? We're not prepared to fail and we're not prepared to succeed. It's kind of like this sense of just not wanting to think about it. And I imagine that that's one of the things that coaching is helpful for, is to help you to kind of think through the decisions you're making. Is it in line with what you really want for your life? Is it in line with who you are? Is it true to you, right?
Absolutely. And really what I love about coaching is that idea of like, you are the expert in yourself. And so typically when people are coming to us for mental health sphere, because we both work in that sphere as well, right? We're the expert.
Yeah.
And so they're coming and they're telling us what's going on with them. And then we're giving them advice about like, this is what you need to do. This is how you handle it. This is a technique that helps you to cope, which is absolutely vital, absolutely important, and I don't want to diminish that at all. Like, I want more of us to go and get that help and to work in that sphere and to not feel like we can't be in that mental health space. I like the pivot though of coaching of, you are the expert. You are going to know so much more about you than I could ever know in 1,000 coaching hours, right? Yeah. And so it's helping you figure out, what are these things resonating for me? What are these things bringing up for me? Why do I have these patterns and ways of interacting with the world or expectations for things? And then how do I move forward in a way that actually feels genuine for me, but I'm also going to follow through on? And when I don't, then I just talk about it and come up with my plan B, right? Because I think sometimes when we have that space, like, I know I've done therapy myself, right? Where you like, I don't want to go tell my therapist I didn't do that thing she said.
Exactly.
So there can be this like almost in some ways like a child relationship, right? Like, I don't want them to be disappointed in me.
Yeah.
Or I don't want them to, be angry that I keep doing these same things over and over again. And in like coaching, it's like, okay, so what happened? Why? This seems to be a pattern. How can we address it? What is it? Is this thing that you're saying that you want what you actually want? And if so, what are the competing things that we're not taking into account when we're thinking about this plan, right? Because we often don't do that. We get focused on the goal. I want A. And we're like, okay, great. Let's come up with a plan. Let's figure out how we're going to get you to A. And then we don't think about like B, C, D, and E that can distract us from A or that competes with A. So even when we think about, our topic around setting boundaries, we're like, yes, I'm going to set boundaries. This is something I know I need to do for me. And then we don't think about, well, I don't want anybody to be mad at me. Yeah. Well, I don't want to disappoint anybody. Well, if I don't do it, it won't get done. Well, there are these other things, and so it's very easy to say, well, just say no. But if just say no was that easy,
we would all be doing it.
Like,
right?
we always think about all of the fields that would be gone because people could just say no. Yeah. Like, I just said no to this. I just said no to that.
It's easy.
It's so simple. I just decided and followed through. Yeah. Like, that's not really reality. So let's talk about and actually try to come up with plans that are going to work, and really have that time to focus on, how is this fitting for me? How is this feeling for me? Do I want this thing that I said that I want? Because I think sometimes too, we think long term, right? So I'm going to go with mine in the business. I was like, okay, I'm going to start this business. It's really just going to be a side business because I love my day job, but it would be nice to, work in this field and have these opportunities. Obviously gets more money going in, let's be honest. And so that's it. But there was also this fear of like, well, what happens if it doesn't work?
Right.
And I was actually talking with both my therapist and I have a coach of like, they were like, okay, so what happens if it doesn't? And I did the whole worst case scenario, and they were like, okay, how realistic is that? But it was also like, if it only lasts for a year, why is that a bad thing? Like, did you learn something about yourself during that year? And that reframe was so powerful for me, because I think that we have this idea that like, oh, if it's right, it's supposed to last forever.
Right.
As opposed to maybe it was just supposed to be for a season, and then we got what we needed, we learned the lessons, we had the opportunities, and now we're moving on to something else. And so the end of something doesn't mean failure. It could just mean that was the end, and now we're looking towards what's next.
because I mean, it makes you think about what is the definition of failure,
Yes.
right? And I think the way we define failure, that's going to set us up. Because then sometimes things that are just normative things in life or just seasons in life, we interpret it as failure, and then we walk away from it feeling disappointed and discouraged. And it's like, well, is that really failure? Or was it actually success, but just not in the way you thought?
Yes,
Yeah.
right? And so that reframe of what we're considering success, what we're considering failure is so, so important, because I think that allows us to operate on a different level.
Yeah. Cool. So, and I always like to remind folks that coaching is different from therapy.
Absolutely.
Coaching is not the same thing as therapy. And a lot of life coaches will tell you that they're like, I'm not a therapist. I'm not going to diagnose mental illness, right?
Absolutely.
So coaches do not give you mental health diagnoses. And they don't necessarily offer the kind of remedies like that you would expect from a therapist or a psychiatrist. But they will kind of help guide you through bolstering your strengths. It seems like a very strength-based kind of intervention, and kind of more of like guidance than anything. Yeah.
Yes, it's very strength-based, and it's also very present and now focused, right? So in therapy, you're going to delve into more of those past issues. In coaching, we're really dealing with what's happening now, right? And so I make it very clear when I'm talking with someone as a coaching client, we are operating in the coaching realm, and if what you need is more therapy, let me give you some referrals to people who are going to help you to deal with that, because I'm not going to operate in that space with you when that's not what you came to me for, right? And so clarifying, right? Like I said, I have a coach and a therapist, right? We can have both, and so they can just be working on different things with us, but really making it clear there's a difference between absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, you. I'm just kind of looking back at your bio. You got your master's in social work from University of Michigan.
Wolverine all the way, millies and blue.
And you have a passion for working with people who have experienced trauma and helping them learn and utilize healthier ways of coping. Boundaries is one of those things, right?
Absolutely.
Learning how to kind of cope. So yeah, let's talk about it a little bit. I know it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, is this idea of how to say no. And for those of you that are just joining, you're listening to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Carryann Williams. And today I'm here with Deborah Jackson. We're going to be talking about setting boundaries. And so if you have a question or a comment, or if you want to participate, you can give us a call at 617-238-7111. That's 617-238-7111. You can also check out our Facebook live stream, and that is on the Facebook page, heat981fm.com. You can check us out on Facebook Live. Thanks to those that have already joined us on Facebook. So, how to say no.
Yes.
Right. Maybe let's start with what prevents us from saying no sometimes. I mean, I think, in our field, in the field of mental health, we want to help people.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
And I think even those that are not working specifically in the field of mental health, there is this desire to be helpful to people, to be liked. I mean, it starts from the time you're a kid, right? Mm-hmm. Where you want to please your parents. You want your parents to smile at you. You don't want them to be mad at you. And it just feels like everybody is nice to you when you say yes.
Absolutely.
People seem to be very pleasant, and they give you a lot of positive feedback and pats on the back when you say yes. So saying no can feel really, really daunting. So, I mean, I guess thinking about that, the first thing I think of is I say yes because I feel like if I say no, I'm going to lose some of that favor. I'm going to lose some of that kind of positive regard. Does that happen with you as well?
Absolutely. And I think even stepping back a bit, especially for Black people, I think we're not to be stereotypical, but we're raised to be collective, right? Mm-hmm. We're raised to be in community. And so when you're in community, there is that expectation that you're gonna participate and be helpful and be an active member. And so part of that, right, is the yes. When people ask things of you, when they need things of you, particularly if it's something that you can do, right? I think we're okay with saying no when we know, like, I legitimately can't do it, don't have it, like, nope, that's not it. But when it's, I could, but I don't want to, right? Or I could, but it doesn't sit right in my spirit. I could, but that's not where my interest lies right now. That's where I think a lot of those responses come in of, we do want to be liked, we do want to be supported, we do want to be helpful. And I think we also have to count in that, like, fawning as a trauma response, right?
Yeah.
Is that people pleasing. We want people to like us. There is safety and comfort and love and support in that. And so think about how many times we are told it's mean to say no. And so I don't want to be mean.
Right.
So I'm not going to say no. And then what does that mean for how we are interacting with people, right? Because one of the things that I am personally working on, because it's a struggle, is like, I'm not saying no to you because I don't want you to think that I'm mean. But by saying yes to you, I'm then saying no to me.
To yourself.
And so I'm being mean to me.
Yes.
Like, so somebody's getting meanness in this.
Somebody's getting the short end of the stick, and either it's you getting the short end of the stick or it's the other person, right?
Right? I mean, there's only so many hours in the day. There's only so much that we have capacity for, energy for, interest for. And so when you are saying yes to some things, you are by consequence saying no to others. Exactly. And so I think that we tend to think that we can do it all, and then really thinking about how much we have had those messages like, you can't do it all, you can't have it all, you can't be it all. I don't want to. Right? Yeah. What is it like to kind of say, yeah, that doesn't work for me. Yeah. I don't want to do it all. I don't want to be it all for everybody. Like, this actually feels exhausting and unsustainable, right?
Unsustainable.
Absolutely. And so when we think about how much of some of the, issues that we know are plaguing our community are because people didn't say no and set boundaries, right? And so they're having health responses because of that. They're having trauma responses because of that. They're having exhaustion because of that. They're having poor relationships because of that. And it's really affecting people in every areas. And so I think it can sometimes sound like hyperbolic, like, okay, all that just because you say no. Yeah. Saying no is actually a really big thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting. You said something a bit earlier about there's a safety sometimes in saying yes. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of made me think about in our community, even just historically, in a multiracial population, that depending on where you are, and I'm going to use the word caste system based on the book Caste and how they kind of describe the social caste in the U.S. And sometimes when you're lower on the caste system, there is safety in saying yes to things. There's sometimes a fear that if you decline to be helpful, if you decline to do certain things, that it literally could be a safety issue. You might lose a position, you might lose an opportunity, you might lose someone's respect. There's kind of a feeling that you need to just be a beast of burden almost and just keep saying yes, keep doing the work, keep doing the thing, not complain, not speak up for yourself. And the setting of boundaries is interpreted all kinds of ways. It's interpreted as ungratefulness. Mm-hmm. It's interpreted as unwillingness, laziness,
right? With selfishness,
right?
All of these really negative connotations. And I think, right, you make a great point when you're talking about the safety and how saying no can be dangerous for some folks. And I think about, there was an article that was shared a while ago that was talking about how after slavery ended, they passed laws in places that said like Black women weren't allowed to not have jobs. And it brought to mind that scene from Color Purple. I'm all about like media and how it comes together, but when Oprah Winfrey's character like gets offered the job by Miss Millie, like, you want to be my maid, and she's like no, and then gets locked up because of that, and then comes out and still has to be that woman's maid, right? And so like that, that obviously is a movie, but how many of our ancestors have had that experience where if I say no, there can be these really negative, harsh consequences that come, and at the end of the day, I'm still gonna have to do it, right? Yeah. So I said no, but I'm still gonna have to do it at the end of the day. So sometimes it's like, just say yes from the beginning and save yourself all of the like pain and turmoil of it, even though you're getting it in another way.
Yeah, and it kind of brings up like, because it's almost like there's two halves to this. One half is our ability to say no, but the other half is whether our boundary is respected.
Yeah.
So there's kind of like the two sides really to talk about. And you're kind of alluding to that second part of it, which is she's trying to set a boundary, but the boundary is not respected. And in those days, it wasn't even allowed, not even legal. And in this days, that might not be a law, but it is a kind of a unwritten social.
But I mean, even when you think about things like the requirements that we have on people who are getting public aid, like, so you have to be looking for a job, or you have to be getting an education, or you have to be doing this. There is that sense of like, if you are not doing, then you are not deserving of help, right? And that's really the way that it's framed. Like, well, we don't want people just being a drain on the system, as opposed to maybe there are some very real fundamental issues why they are not working at this time, but we don't value their humanity. It's like, oh no, if you're going to get this thing from us, you need to be doing something in return, right? So you need to be showing that you're worth it. And that you can face charges, right? Or you can get your benefits cut, or you can face these consequences because you aren't doing what someone feels you should be doing.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's so, we kind of talked about a lot of things there. I think one thing we talked about is the idea of saying no, saying, I don't want to do something, I can't do something. One thing that we never mentioned is, what if you want to do something, but you know that you really don't have the time for it, and that it would be a strain on your schedule? Because that happens to, that's one thing that happens to me all the time. There's a lot of things that I would love to do, I would be so interested in doing, and I have the ability to do, but I have to say no, because if I didn't, I would be up 24 hours a day just doing stuff.
Absolutely.
Right? Because there's and this happens to a lot of people that they are interested in a lot of things and just do a lot of things. And I mean, even if I'm doing nothing, I can say, well, let me go learn a new language. Let me kind of make up something to do. And so there's so much out there. And learning to just even say no to myself. Yeah. Sometimes it's a problem. So I didn't say no to myself, to my own schedule, saying, nope, you can't add another thing to your schedule. Imagine you talking to your coaching clients about that. Don't add another thing to your schedule. Sometimes you have to say no to yourself, and sometimes you have to say no to other people, even if it's a project that you might actually be interested in and able to do, to say no to yourself. Nope, I'm going to limit. I'm going to take Friday off. I'm going to take Saturday mornings off, blah, blah, blah.
Absolutely. And so I really am a big fan of the Nap Ministry on Instagram, and they talk about rest as a social justice issue, right? As rest as resistance, because we are also in a country that prioritizes productivity, right? So if I'm resting, then I'm lazy. And there's all, again, of the negative connotations that come with that. And then as opposed to no, if I'm not resting, we know automatically, biologically, there are things that we're going to be suffering from if we don't get enough rest, right? That if we're not taking enough time to really decompress, to center ourselves, to have that space, then we aren't going to be learning at the same level that we can. We're not going to be able to produce at the same level that we can, but we're also just not going to be able to enjoy things in the same way that we can. And so really thinking about, what are we saying to ourselves? It's great that we have all of these interests and hobbies. Are we sort of prioritizing that, and are we making sure that in that priority we also exist? So that the priority is not just doing, the priority is also being. And I think that can be a very tricky one for us to go to.
Doing versus being.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. I think you're right. We live in a culture where you are given a lot of positive reinforcement for doing.
Absolutely, right? And if you're not doing, well, why aren't you doing it? What was you doing instead? So when we think about labeling that or connecting that with the idea around boundaries, right? Because if you ask me for something and I say no, a lot of times the next thing is going to be well, why no? And so then I have to justify for you why my no is no. It can't just be
as though that person's entitled to an excuse,
right? Or that you're entitled to the explanation. Maybe I want to share it with you, but maybe I don't, right? And you're not entitled to that. But it's if I tell you the reason, what happens if you're well, that's not a very good reason, so now I'm going to tell you why you should have told me yes, and now I have to go back and forth with you around it, as opposed to just living in my no.
It becomes a debate.
Absolutely, right? And it's that sense of justification. Do you have a good enough reason
to say no to me?
Exactly. It's
and then people start judging your reasons then. So it's kind of well, I want you to attend this thing on Friday or help volunteer at this place, and you say no. Well, why can't? What are you doing at that time? And people will just kind of brazenly ask you, well, what are you doing at this time? And it's What if I don't want to tell you what I'm doing? What if I'm actually doing nothing, but I need Friday off?
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm doing. And for the other person, it's like they feel like, well, if you don't have a good enough reason, then I'm judging you for not coming. Like, again, you're being a bad friend, or you're being irresponsible, you're being lazy. I can't depend on you for anything.
Absolutely.
Blah, blah, blah.
Absolutely. Right. And that idea of like, well, I thought that this was something that mattered to you, either our relationship or this thing that I'm asking you to do. And like, you're saying no, so obviously that doesn't matter to you, as opposed to like, again, we can have competing priorities. Multiple things can be true at the same time. So, right. So maybe I absolutely believe in that mission that's happening on Friday and I want to support that, but I really need to be doing something else, even if that something else is nothing. That is what I need to be doing. And that is what the priority is for me at that time. That doesn't mean that I still don't support you and that I still don't want to be like in relationship or connection with you. It just means you can't have what you're asking for. And I think that that is a very hard thing, because we get very black and white. Like, either you're for me or you're against me. You didn't do what I wanted you to do. You didn't have a good enough reason, or you wouldn't tell me what your reason was. So clearly you're against me. You're a bad person, right? Like all of that, that worst case scenario plays out in that situation, as opposed to like, oh, maybe you had something else going on, right? Like, and that's okay.
Yeah. And it kind of, it makes me think about how sometimes with Black women, how there's kind of, and maybe women in general, but particularly Black women, there's this expectation that we're just going to be collaborative and that we're going to be self-sacrificial all the time.
Yes.
And that if you try to regain some time for yourself, there's this sense of like, you're not following the social expectation for what Black women should be and should be doing. You're supposed to just show up all the time. You're supposed to kind of work and complain about how you never have time to do things, but never actually take the time. And you get pats on the back for that. You get a lot of accolades, and they'll say, oh, you know, this person is such a good person and she's self-sacrificial, blah, blah, blah. But if you do set the boundaries and you actually take care of yourself, then society doesn't expect that. There's a sense of, you're not doing what we expect you to do as a Black woman. Why are you actually successfully setting boundaries? That doesn't make any sense. Don't do that.
Absolutely, right? That archetype of the Black woman as the mule of the world, right?
Yeah.
And so that we're supposed to show up and show out for everybody else and save people from their, bad decisions. Help us, Stacey Abraham, even though you got robbed from being governor, right? Yeah. Like, get all these other people registered to vote. But also then that idea that, and we're not also going to show up back collectively for you. So we expect you to do, to give, to support, to uphold, to uplift, all of those things, and then not necessarily expect any of that back. And so then if you then say, well, no, I'm going to prioritize me, right? I'm going to write the book. I'm going to go on the vacation. I'm going to buy the house. It's like, well, how dare you? The audacity of you thinking that you should have something for you. You're supposed to be all about the collective. Like, make that make sense.
Yeah, exactly, right? And, I find that how people then interpret your boundaries is, it's different. So you can have, let's say someone invites you and a male colleague, right? And you have the exact same response of like, no, I can't do it. If a man sets a boundary, somehow there's like this expectation that, oh yeah, I'm sure he has other things to do and he's pretty busy, and you like accept it. When the woman sets the boundary, there's a feeling that, oh, she's being mean, or she's being kind of rude, or irritable, or, kind of like it's more intimidating for some reason, because there's an expectation that the woman is going to say yes. Or, even think about how people say yes. They expect you to be kind of apologetic if you say no. Like, you're supposed to, I'm so sorry, but I can't do it. And it's like, why am I apologizing?
Exactly, right? And that idea too, that I think that in that woman's space, if you can't, then it's like, well, what are you doing with your time again, right? Or like, why you don't know how to schedule things, right? Like, why do you not know how to prioritize the priorities? And clearly, if it's a priority for me, it should be a priority for you, because there is that reciprocal nature of the relationships, as opposed to like, maybe you have your own priorities and that it's not a negative thing. But I definitely agree with that idea of like, if you say no, you're supposed to say it in the nicest, sweetest, most, subservient way. And you're also supposed to like somehow make reparations.
Yes.
So I can't do this now. Maybe I can do it later, or maybe I can do this other thing for you, or maybe I'm going to get somebody else to help you with it because I can't. So it can't, again, my no can't just be no. There has to be all of these other things that are attached to it. And for a lot of us, that's why it's so hard to have our no be a complete sentence. And that's something to really just work on, that like, you don't owe anybody an explanation or a justification for your no. You can give it if you choose to, but you do not owe anybody that. And so can you just make no a complete sentence?
Right. Wow. I guess, one of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on, and for those of you that are just joining again, you're listening to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Carryann Williams, and today my guest is Deborah Jackson. We're talking about setting boundaries. So if you have a question or a comment, you can give us a call at 617-238-7111. That's 617-238-7111. We're also on Facebook Live on the page heat981fm.com. So you can go to the Facebook page, heat981fm.com, for a Facebook Live. And thanks for those that have already joined by Facebook. One of our Facebook listeners saying, yep, no is a complete sentence. No is a complete sentence. I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on is this idea of the person saying no and how they can cope with the feelings that it brings up for them. Mm-hmm. Because clearly one of the reasons it's hard to say no is that it's bringing up some kind of feeling from us. We're anticipating some kind of consequence, really. And so this idea that now we have to deal with the possibility of rejection and the possibility of disapproval is, do you have any thoughts about that, or have you had to deal with things like that with your coaching clients where they're saying, well, I'm saying yes because it's so hard to deal with the feelings of rejection and disapproval?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that one of the things that we talk about is, what was your reason for wanting to say no, right? Whether you said no or not, what was the reason that you wanted to say no? And usually, typically, people will have a reason, right? Like, I didn't want to. There were other competing priorities. This person relies on me too much. I was exhausted and didn't have the capacity. There was some reason why you're saying no. And now let's examine the reasons why you felt like you either couldn't or shouldn't say no, right? And a lot of it is that fear of the repercussions. I'm fearing that there is going to be damage to this relationship because I am setting this limit. And one of the things that we then talk about is, you are completely entitled to set your boundaries. The other person is completely entitled to respond to your boundaries. And so sometimes those boundaries are going to be in alignment, right? I am now teaching you how I expect to be treated or what my limits are. You are going to have maybe a little bit of struggle because nobody likes boundaries when they first come along. So like, it's the kid who's like, what, nap time? I don't think so. Or why aren't you giving me that candy? But you learn, and then the relationship, pivots and it grows and everything is good. Or what happens is they then have different boundaries or different expectations, and now you have to negotiate, is this relationship going to continue? And I think going back to that original idea of, one thing that I think is really important, and again, especially I think for my Black women and my BIPOC women clients, because these are my people, is the idea that I am going to set this limit. You are going to respond however it is that you respond, and then I am going to respond to your response, right?
Yes.
But I am not entitled any particular response from you to my boundaries. It's not about you that I'm setting the boundaries. The boundaries are really about myself. Yeah. I'm saying what I want, what I need, what works and what doesn't work for me. And then you respond, right? However you're going to respond. And then I have to think about how I'm responding to that, right? So there was someone that I was talking to recently where their sister has started setting up a different boundary situation going on, and it was really different to the situation that they had. They felt really, hurt and disappointed, and I completely understood that this relationship worked one way, now it's working a different way. It feels really unfair. It feels really not reciprocal to you anymore. You can't change their boundaries, though. You have to then decide what your boundaries are. So then it doesn't become about me trying to get you to say yes. It becomes about, how am I responding to your no? right? Am I still going to react and give you what it is that you need because you've set this boundary? And am I still going to show up for you in the same way that I have been? Or do I need to then look at what my boundaries are and say, well, hey, if this isn't reciprocal for me, like, I'm no longer going to show up in the same way either, because now that's my boundary, right? And so I think that we have to really consider the reciprocal nature, because I think sometimes when we think about setting boundaries, it's like, I'm gonna set my boundaries and then everybody gonna get online, right? Like, everybody's gonna fall into place and everything is just gonna be wonderful. No, unfortunately, that is not always the case. And so it's not about that. It's about what works for me. What's bringing me peace? What's bringing me joy? When I talk about boundaries with people, that's my first things. What brings you peace? What brings you joy? If you don't have peace, if you don't have joy, why are you doing it? Right. Sometimes we have to do it anyhow, right? Like, we don't always feel joy going into work or peace going into work, but we got to. These bills ain't gonna pay themselves, so I'm gonna show up the way that I need to. And then we'll see where it goes from there. But also, there's the times where it's like, no, this doesn't work anymore, and I'm not going to keep centering other people in my own life. Right. And so when I then decide that I'm going to center myself, other people are going to respond, because I'm not the center of their life either, right? Like, I'm saying, I don't want you to be the center of my life. You can then say, okay, well, then you're not the center of mine.
Exactly.
Great. Now, how are we then negotiating what this relationship is like? Is this something that is going to be able to work for both of us? Are we going to be able to negotiate and find a way to really move forward in a way that does meet both of our needs? Obviously, maybe not 100%, but something that we feel like, yes, this is still working and we found our way forward. Or is it something where it's like, we're really going to have to limit and, go low contact, go no contact, end that relationship? And I think that particularly, especially in the African American community, is something that is really difficult when we sort of start saying, I don't have contact with family anymore because they don't really respect my boundaries, or I don't talk to that person who was my childhood best friend because they didn't respect my boundaries. You get a lot of, well, why? Well, blood is thicker than water. Well, your day one friends are supposed to be there for life, all of this stuff, as opposed to, it didn't work. I was in a different season. I was in a different place. No disrespect at all to what they're experiencing or what they're going through. It just no longer fits my life. And so I had to make changes. But that's a really hard thing to say, and a really hard thing to do. And there's some times where you get fallback. But if you go back to those ideas of what brings me joy, what brings me peace, then you know that, hey, this is what I have to do for me.
Yeah, and you mentioned early about the kind of the reciprocal. I've just seen so many examples of folks who they are quick to set boundaries, but when you try to set a boundary with them, they respond so negatively. Like, they get really offended, really.
Yes.
If you try to set a boundary with them and say no to them, but they're very quick to say no to you, and they can't really see that that dissonance, I guess. They can't see that kind of that distinction there. I know that one of the things that I sometimes think about is, when you say no to something, is whether or not, like, sometimes I'm just saying no to that one thing. Like, I can show up for something else in the future, but there's this fear that if I say no, then the person is going to stop coming to me. They're going to stop coming to ask me, and they're going to kind of, like, I don't know, maybe like shut down, kind of. So this sense of, if somebody offers me an opportunity, but I don't have time to do it this time around, but I may have time in 3 months, but if I say no, they're going to stop offering me opportunities. They're going to stop coming to me with things that are available. Do you ever kind of see that with, people that you talk to, or clients that kind of feel like maybe their work schedule, they don't want to say no to something because they feel like they're missing out?
Absolutely, right? Fear of missing out is a big thing for a lot of us. Yeah. And one of the things that I think is important is to clarify, right? Like, is it really the case that if you say no to this opportunity, it's never going to come around again? Mm-hmm. Sometimes that absolutely is the case, right? Like, it's a one and done opportunity and that's it. But oftentimes, if you are saying, hey, I can't do this now, but keep me in mind for the next opportunity, or hey, I can't do this now, but my schedule opens wide up again in October. Summer's super busy, but October, like, once things are settled, that's a time. Does that work for you to plan this thing or to do this thing? thing or to show up in this way. Or so I think really trying to have that clarity about the reality of the situation and then negotiate, but also being really clear again about like your boundaries and why you're setting them. And so it's not, I think sometimes we'll say no, we're afraid to say no because, right, we're afraid, okay, this opportunity isn't going to come around again. But I think also we get afraid to say that, like, hey, I can't do it now, but I can do it in October, because we're like, well, maybe they won't want it then.
Yeah.
Or to say like, hey, so is this a paid opportunity, or are you expecting me to, to give like free labor? Because we supposed to just show up.
Exactly.
You care about the mission, and so you're supposed to just show up. And it's like, wait, no, that's taking away, and so I think that we have to remind ourselves that, again, for everything that you're saying yes to, you're saying no to something else.
Yeah.
So if I say yes to this thing that I know I truly don't have the capacity for, it's a great thing, but I just do not have the capacity for, what else is going to suffer because of that yes?
Yeah. No, I like that phrase. I think that's almost kind of like, I think one of the kind of the key pearls, the pearls from our discussion today is this idea of when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else.
Absolutely.
To always kind of remember that. So if I say yes to this opportunity, I might be saying no to my weekends. Like, I kiss my weekends goodbye if I say yes to this opportunity. If I, agree to go to this place or whatever, then I'm saying no to something else that I had planned, or maybe saying no to eating dinner that night, because that's always what happens to me. The more I say yes to, the less time I have to eat and sleep. So it's like, so I'm saying yes to one thing, I'm saying no to another. So even just thinking about practical things like that, or time spent with your family, right? If I say yes to this thing, then I'm spending less time with my family. So
Absolutely.
there's always
and
something to think about there.
Yeah, I would say too, thinking about this idea of going to your example, I said yes, and then I couldn't eat and sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, how many other things are on your schedule that are affected because you weren't properly rested and you weren't properly fueled?
Exactly.
So it's not just that you then didn't get to eat and sleep in the way that you wanted to. It's like, I know for myself, if I get worn down, my sleeping habits are crazy already, right? But you have so many days of that where you can still sort of operate at your best capacity, and then it gets real rough. And it's not like, oh, well, I'm going to go to bed tonight, make sure I get that full 8 hours or whatever your magic number is, and then I'm going to be back to normal. Like, it sometimes takes a couple of days of good sleep before you get back to normal. And so it's really thinking about that, right? Or what's going on with me when I'm just not even properly like fueling my body or giving myself space to move, right? One of the things that I think was so hard about COVID was we couldn't go anywhere, but we also, like, it was great in some ways because we had like an excuse for why we were saying no to some things. But there was a lot of self-care that I think had to really get reimagined in a different way, and a lot of relationships that had to get really reimagined in a different way. And so one of the things that I personally struggled with was like, my time at the gym is sacred. Like, my trainer is like key to me, and I know I don't look like somebody who wears that, but I power lift, and that's what it is. And it's that time that is really like me focused and really gets me centered, really gets me grounded, really has me present in my body. When that was gone for a couple of months, I really, really struggled in a way, because it was like I didn't have that same connection to myself. I didn't have that same priority of time. I didn't have that same sort of just space to recharge myself so that I could go out and do all of those other things. So it was a really hard space. And so I think that we have to think about that too, right? When we're putting those things to the wayside so that we can do these other things, often they're key to our self-care, right? It's the eating, it's the sleeping, it's the gym, it's the family time, it's the TV show you're binge watching, it's the, it's the whatever. But it's those things that we're missing out on, and then we get even more run down. So how are we making sure that we have that space, that capacity to really take care of ourselves and all of the things in our lives that we hold sacred?
Wow. So guys, if you're listening, and we're almost coming to a close, but if you have any last minute questions or comments, you give us a call at 617-238-7111. That's 617-238-7111. We're also on Facebook Live, so you can drop a comment on the live stream on heat981fm.com. You're listening to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Kerryann Williams, and my guest today is Deborah Jackson. We're talking about setting boundaries, how hard it can be to set them, and sometimes how hard it can be for other people to respect the boundaries. I know that there have been times where I try to set boundaries, and maybe someone is asking me to help with something, and I say no, and it's kind of like this argument that you're the only one that can do it, yes. Or I don't think anybody else is right to do this thing, or that kind of thing. And it's like, sometimes, as you mentioned, like things like the pandemic, it's so helpful in that way that you can actually literally say, sorry, I can't do it because of the pandemic. Or sometimes I feel relieved when I actually am physically going somewhere else. Yes. And I can say, you know what, I'm so sorry. I would do it, but I have to travel to this place. And, geez, oh my goodness, that airport, But it's kind of like, it kind of gives you an out. Because otherwise, sometimes people have a hard time just being okay with you saying no. They interpret it as all kinds of things. They can interpret it as, in some cases, if it's a family member with an interpersonal conflict, they can interpret it as spitefulness. Mm-hmm. Or they can interpret it as, like not being collaborative, not being a good colleague. There's just all these different things that people can emotionally load onto your natural, normal boundaries of saying, no, I can't do this thing.
Right. And I think another one is like selfish. Yeah. That you're being selfish. Yeah. And that like selfish is a really dirty word, right?
Yeah.
Like
it's not, like, I'm a good person. it kind of makes you feel like you're a bad person. Yeah.
Exactly. And so to really think about what that means, and I think I again go back to that image of like, particularly in the African American community, right? Think about sort of growing up that there was like the family member's house that everybody went to, that you could go to at any time. When you needed something, they were gonna make sure you had it. They were gonna really like show up for you in that way. And so there was that expectation that was gonna travel through, that was what's gonna be the place for that. Everyone should respond in that way, right? Yeah. And so then if I'm saying no, am I sort of negating this contract that exists, this unspoken contract that like we are going to go all in for everyone? And the corresponding image that I like to have with that though is, how often were those people exhausted? Yeah. Like how often did you see those people maybe dying early because their bodies physically could not like give out? But also a side effect too, how many families fell apart because Big Mom wasn't there anymore, and Big Mom was the one who did everything for everybody, and so when she's gone, nobody knows how to do anything. Nobody knows. So in that way where Big Mom really thought that she was being helpful and being the rock and being the stability and being the support for the family, in some ways she was actually cheating other people because nobody else learned how to do what she did or knew how to really hold things together without her. And so then that loss is even more devastating. And so when I think about that, I think about that too, right? Because some of the times when we are not setting limits, it's that I'm getting in because I want to help you. Yeah. I'm attached to you. I'm connected to you. I want to see you do well. I see you struggling, so I'm going to get in there and save you, fix you, rescue you, help you. Yeah. But what that means then is that you don't learn how to fix it yourself. You don't learn how to do it yourself. And then sometimes what happens is you then come to equate me with the person who does those things for you, right? So you then never feel the capacity to learn it, nor the desire to, because you know that I will do it for you. Then what happens when I'm like, yeah, I'm good, I'm done, I'm over it, I'm sick.
It becomes a calamity.
Right? Because, oh my gosh, what you mean no? You done 50, 11 times, you say yes, and now you saying no. How dare you? The audacity.
Oh my goodness. So the time goes by so quickly. I want to thank you so much for coming in today, Deb, talking about boundaries, and it's just so much to think about. I'll have to have you come back again and talk some more. Yeah. So guys, you've been listening to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Kerryann Williams. My guest today was Deborah Jackson. We were talking about boundaries. And so if you want to hear more on Black mental health, you can tune in every Sunday at 1 p.m. here on 98.1 FM, The Urban Heat. So wishing you a good week. Oh, happy Father's Day, actually.
Yes, happy Father's Day
to my dad who's listening in Jamaica. Happy Father's Day, Daddy. And I'll talk with you guys next week. If you have any questions for me, if you want to suggest any topics for the future, you can DM me on Instagram at drkerryann. That's drkerryann. If you want to get in contact with Deborah Jackson, she's also on Instagram, Deliberately Daring. You can find out more from her. She's a consulting company, also Deliberately Daring, coaching and consultation, and that's available online as well. So check in with you next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So I hope you enjoyed the show today. For more on Black mental health, you can go to my website, which is drkerryann.net. You can also DM me on Instagram at drkerryann. That's drkerryann. And there you can ask me questions or tell me what you want me to talk about next on my show. I look forward to hearing from you. So talk to you again next time.